U.S. economy has been in a very vulnerable position over the past few decades. We've faced lots of ups and downs, but the declines have been far deeper than any rebounds recorded along the way. In recent years, economic conditions have become particularly dire. The cost of living is rising at a much faster rate than wages, and the vast majority of jobs do not offer enough financial support for workers to make ends meet. That's why, for millions of Americans, being flat broke has become a permanent status. Families are coping with an unprecedented level of financial stress as the price of everything has hit new record highs with each passing of every week. For those living paycheck to paycheck, this situation has been an absolute nightmare. People are seeing their weekly earnings rapidly disappear as their bills get higher and higher, and most of them cannot afford to cover any emergency expense. On the other hand, labor conditions continue to deteriorate. Most jobs out there are low paid, and employees are forced to work exceedingly long hours to get enough money to survive for another month. Middle-class families are not immune. In fact, the U.S. middle class is shrinking at a very alarming rate ever since most of our middle-class jobs have been shipped to foreign markets. In every new survey, study, or analysis published by analytics firms, the results show the same thing. The financial conditions of the average American family continues to decline. Today, soaring living costs are the number one financial concern for American families. As wages stagnate and inflation runs rampant, more and more families are taking on extraordinary amounts of debt to preserve their living standards, while others are taking on loans to afford unexpected health expenses or to prevent their homes from being foreclosed. And those whose credit score doesn't even allow them to get a loan are actually having to rely on government assistance to stay afloat. The numbers we've compiled in today's video will expose that right now, more Americans than at any other point since the 1950s are flat broke and have lost hope. Until something changes in the way this country is run by our leaders, the level of despair and frustration in the United States will continue to grow. Before checking out our list, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and please subscribe to our channel to keep updated with our future videos. Without further ado, here are 15 facts about the financial condition of American families that will blow your mind. 1. Today, we have the lowest worker participation rate in our labor force ever recorded in modern times. According to the Heritage Foundation, the number of workers in the labor force has declined steadily over the past 2 years, and the current participation rate stands at 61.7%. That's a 16% decrease from 2019 levels. On the flip side, 44% of job openings are for low-paid positions. 2. Businesses are struggling to stay afloat as well. While operational costs become more expensive with each passing month, fewer employers have the means to offer health insurance for their workers. Only 44% of Americans are currently covered by employer-provided health insurance, William Russell data shows. 3. Over the past 10 years, the median yearly wage only increased by $7,987. In 2012, that figure was at $26,261, and in 2022, median yearly wages went up to $34,248. Yearly living expenses, on the other hand, have soared to $61,331 last year, according to the Motley's Fool. 4. At the same time, a study released by CNBC in January 2022 revealed that the average American household is carrying $155,622 in debt, the highest rate on record. 5. Data from the website extremeinequality.org reveals that only the top 5% of American households have earned enough additional income to match the staggering increase in housing costs since 1975 Today, the average asking price for a newly built home has jumped to $453,700. 6 at this point, American families are around $15 trillion poorer than they were back in the early 2000s. 7. The bottom 50% of all Americans only own less than 2.5% of all the wealth produced in the United States. 8. A recent study conducted by AmericanProgress.org found that approximately 11 million children in the United States, and that's about 1 in 7, are currently living below the poverty line. 9. Almost 50 million Americans rely on food stamps to feed their families. Nearly 22 million of these households have 2 or more children. 10. More than half of all young adults, or about 52%, are still living with their parents as they struggle to afford housing, having to work in low-wage jobs. 11. As inflation continues to roar, 64% of Americans are now living paycheck to paycheck, up from 49% in 2021 and 43% before the beginning of the health crisis. 12. 41% of the U.S. population said that they have not been contributing anything to their retirement savings since 2020. Amongst Generation Zers and Millennials, that rate jumps to 55%, according to Think Advisor. 13. A survey published by the Trans-America Center for Retirement Studies indicated that at least 40% of Americans have less than $16,000 saved up for retirement. 14. Last year, 62% of personal bankruptcies in the United States were due to medical expenses, and according to corporate bankruptcy statistics, bankruptcies involving corporations account for only 3% of the total bankruptcy number, meaning that 97% of bankruptcies are filed by individuals. And 15. In 1950, the ratio of the average executive's paycheck to the average worker's paycheck was about 30 to 1. In 2021, get this, that ratio has exploded to 940 to 1. The ratio of the average executive to the average worker. The economic reality American families are having to endure is extremely different than the one wealthy CEOs have to face. And yet, last year alone, CEOs earned over 350% more than the average American worker. One of the main difficulties we're having today, and that's likely to persist for many years, is the lack of good jobs. Over 50 million middle-class jobs have been shipped overseas over the last few decades. Our leaders have promised us that outsourcing our production to economies to other nations where it's legal to pay slave labor wages to workers would not affect America's working conditions. Of course, that is far from the truth, and many people are realizing this just now. In fact, things are decaying so rapidly that the corporate media is trying to put a positive spin on the economic distortions happening right now. You don't even need to search that deeply to find some article saying that inflation is actually good for the middle class, or that wealth inequality is not as bad as we think. Even before things have gotten so crazy, there were already people suggesting that we should all just accept that the standard of living of American workers is inevitably going to collapse, and that there isn't anything that could be done to prevent it from happening. You know, a couple of years ago, billionaire Howard Marks said that we have to accept that the coming decades are likely to see U.S. standards of living decline relative to the rest of the world. Unless our goods offer a better cost-to-benefit bargain, there's no reason why American workers should continue to enjoy the same lifestyle advantage over workers in other countries. I just don't expect to hear many politicians own up to this reality on the stump. Unfortunately, many Americans are seemingly willing to accept that reality because they keep sending the same clowns back to D.C. Meanwhile, inflation continues to depress wages, and as many firms have been warning recently, the odds of a recession this year continue to rise. If you're a blue-collar worker, you should wake up to the fact that the system has failed you. And there's no point in defending politicians that do not care about our real problems. We shouldn't wait for the good jobs to come back because that's simply not going to happen. They're long gone, and so are our prospects for social mobility. That's why we always encourage our viewers to become independent from the system. Given the current outlook, it's very clear there's nothing they can offer to us. They're only draining our resources, keeping us in a state of utter vulnerability and anxiety so they can rule us more easily. It is safe to say that as our economic system continues to degenerate, more and more Americans are going to become extremely desperate. And you know how this works. Desperate people do, that's right, desperate things. We are already starting to see signs that the fabric of American society is starting to be ripped to shreds. We're hearing cases of people drilling holes in gas tanks as they cannot afford gasoline anymore. Have you ever wondered what's really going to happen if the economy falls back into recession and gets even worse? Have you ever thought about what our leaders are going to do to stop this mess? Because up until now, they seem too busy spending government resources and being accused of corruption scandals. So while tens of millions of American families are flat broke and about to fall into poverty, our politicians continue to prove that they are incredibly unprepared for their jobs. While they insist that this is what a recovery looks like, the poor are getting poorer, our average wages will continue to fall behind inflation, and social unrest will continue to grow. Still, there are many people out there believing that we're somehow headed for a bright future. But the truth is that it is getting really hard to understand why anyone could possibly believe that. We appreciate you watching this report. Please share this link with friends and family. Please subscribe and write your comments below this video.